magnificent country, right, for taking care of us. We have to be grateful to the Egyptians for hosting us. But reality is, we have a destination, and we have to be sure that we preserve who we are, that we should merit that redemption. So those were the ideals of Hadorahu, of the earlier generation, the ones that interacted with Yaakov and with Yosef and with the children of Yaakov. But when the generation dies, we turn to verse 7, and this one verse is going to tell us about what is taking place regarding the attitude of the people of Israel towards their presence in Egypt. Uvnei Israel, what happens with the passing of the old-timers, those that reminded them what they are really about and what their attitude should be towards the land? Number one, Paru. This is nice. They multiplied. It's a nation that grew. Baruch Hashem. We're always grateful to the Almighty when there's Jewish growth. Vayishritzu. And they, what happened? They increased like Vayishritzu. What word comes to mind? Sheretz, which is a rodent. Which I don't like that as a way of describing my ancestors. Vayishritzu. Okay, so some will say, you know what we're being told here? This is how they were viewed by the Egyptians. You know, they're moving into new neighborhoods, right? The Jews used to only be in Brooklyn, and now, right, they're everywhere. They're moving into all different places in Jersey, you know? So perhaps this is the attitude that was viewed by the non-Jews towards the Jews. They're like rodents, right? They're multiplying like rodents. Okay. Perhaps, but we'll see another explanation. Vayirbu vayatzmu, and they multiply and they strengthen b'me'od me'od, tremendously. Vatimaleha haaretz osam, the land became filled with them. Now, numbers-wise, it's not the case. It's not like they were everywhere throughout the land, but the impact was everywhere, right? In other words, when it comes to all different industries, when it came, you know, the architects were Jewish, and the doctors and the lawyers, and therefore, you know, they mentioned about Hungary before the war. There's a list of percentage-wise how many Jews were doctors and lawyers, and it's quite incredible that you have a population that could be 3%, 2%, and that in some industries you will find them close to 50%. So for the masses, it appears like the Jews are everywhere. The Jews are everywhere. So this is what's taking place. Vatimaleha haaretz otam. Jews felt very comfortable in Egypt, right? Egypt is home. They no doubt became big fans of the local soccer team of the Egyptians. They felt that they are part of the country. But then we come to the reminder. Vayakam melech chadash al Mitzrayim. A new king arose over Egypt with one of the most shocking 5 words that appear in all of Torah. Asher lo yada et Yosef, who did not know Yosef, which is not possible. Not possible. Yosef had such an impact because he wasn't just the one who saved the country during the years of famine, but he established long-term systems of how taxes are paid, what the government owns, what the responsibility of the priests and of clergy is, and their status regarding the paying of taxes and the working of the land. Everything in Egypt was based on the Yosef system. And here you have a new king who does not know him. So obviously the rabbis tell us, Asher lo yada et Yosef, gemach zach nicht wissen. Right? He made himself either not knowing, or he did not want to know Yosef. No interest in Yosef. So this is the beginning, forgetting the contribution that the Jewish people made to a society, forgetting about what the Jews do. So this is what we are being told in this text, and we have the beginning of the enslavement that we are very familiar with. Now, there is a Sforno, one of the commentators, early 16th century, and he tells us that you should know, when the text notes that the new king, Lo Yada et Yosef, so he says the following, and I'll read it first in Hebrew. Lo alta alev hamelech achadash efsharut heyoto mizeh ha'am. In other words, it did not come into the mind of the new king. He could not even imagine that such an effective individual who was so good to this country, who did so much for this society, it is not possible that he is one of those people, that he's one of the Jews. Right? Jews live off others, right? Jews are parasites. Jews come in and they just want to do it their way and they don't want to interact, but at the same time, they want to figure out ways how to not pay taxes. They're not concerned about society, they're only concerned about themselves. Yosef was the complete opposite. So therefore, in the mind of the new king, it is not possible that this legend was Heyoto Mizeh Am, was one of the people of Israel. So he made this detachment, this complete detachment, the people of Israel, and the one who made the greatest contribution to the land and to the kingdom in essence, and to that dynasty that existed. That's how Sforno understands it. But the truth is, there's an element of what we call midah keneged midah. In other words, it is not by coincidence that the king of Egypt detaches Yosef from the people. It's not by coincidence. And what do I mean by that? So, a few weeks ago, the Jewish world celebrated the Siyum Hashas. You've heard of it, right? It was in the news, a lot of positive coverage, which was very, very nice, where many people completed the Talmud after a 7.5-year cycle. And there were many wonderful emails that circulated on WhatsApps about what compliments the Jews received from these stadiums, and especially in England, where they have to deal with English soccer fans, right? Where, there's not a game that you don't have at least 250 fellows who had a little bit too much of their ale, right? And the Jewish people come and they behave and they said thank you. Big Kiddush Hashem, wonderful, wonderful event indeed. A siyum is one of excitement. We've completed something, we've accomplished something, we're inspired to do more. And the siyum is so important that there's a prayer that was established many centuries ago to be said at every single siyum. Every time you complete a tractate, you say that prayer. It's a prayer that is based on words in the Talmud. And among the statements said in this prayer, where we are grateful to the Almighty for the fact that we've been guided to value our tradition, value this text of Torah, and that indeed we merited to complete a section of it, we turn to the Almighty and we say, you know what? We are different than others. When you have gratitude, sometimes you have to contrast yourself to others and say that we are different than the others because anu rotzim, we run. In other words, we're driven. We have an agenda to study our tradition and text and Torah. And there are others, vehem rotzim, but there are others also that run. Right? You have traffic downtown. A lot of people are running to work. A lot of people are running to the subway. Right? People are running. Anu rotzim vehem rotzim. But when we are running, what's our agenda? What's our goal? L'chayei. This is a prayer. Anu rotzim l'chayei olam haba. You know what we are running to? To merit the world to come. That when we value our tradition, when we study it, we make it part of our life, we merit the world to come. Vehem ratzim, but the others who are running, where are they running? Ready for this? Be'er shachas. Be'er, a well of shachas, of destruction. Now, is that a nice thing to say about everyone that's going to work? That they're going to the well of destruction? So obviously it's not referring to people going to work. Obviously not. What it is referring to, it is addressing the fact that there are often, and throughout history, Jewish people who believe that the values of Judaism are not the real values that are going to do good for the world. They're not finding solutions to world problems. Judaism does not offer that. And we believe that there should be a well. A well is a symbol of life because it provides for you water. And there are spiritual wells, right? The Torah is compared to water. And the Torah comes from a well. But there are those who believe that this is not the well we should be running towards. We should be running towards some universal wells that are not just focusing on this little group called the Jewish people. We should come up with universal solutions. And it has been quite attractive to people who are very much knowledgeable in Jewish tradition, right, yeshiva students, to find meaning in those external wells. You know that you've heard of the Slabotka yeshiva, right? So you've heard of the Volozhin yeshiva. Do you know how many communists were produced by these institutions? People that were smart, that were intellectual, but they simply didn't find meaning in the text, believing that Judaism is not a solution to the world's problems, right, to class warfare. It's not going to solve the issues of our modern world. So we got to go ahead and look for a new well that's going to solve world problems, like socialism, right? That's what will take care. There will be no problems if we all become socialists. Communism, right? Ideals that are out there, that's how we're going to solve world problems. It's a Jewish sickness. It's a Jewish sickness that we believe that we're going to find a solution out there, right? Become extremely committed to our country, that will take care of our problems. We will end anti-Semitism. If we buy into the wells of society, to the values, and believe that all I got to do is be a good citizen of this country, if I'm a good German citizen, that will end anti-Semitism. If I'm a good citizen of Egypt, then indeed all the problems will vanish, because a universal well is much greater than this Jewish well. Hem anurotzim, when we study Torah, we run to our well, and our well brings the world to come. Because long term, we know very well what the contribution of our tradition and our nation has been to the world. Vehem rotzim, but those that run, meloif, right? That's what it's saying. You run. You got to run. You run out of the Beis Medrash to go and believe that there are solutions in other places. They are rotzim to where? To a well. But what kind of well? Right, being committed to Germany, did that really solve the problems of the world in the beginning in this first half of the 20th century? Did the commitment to Egypt solve the problems of the Jews? It was a be'er of shachas, of destruction. And therefore, notes the Sforno, Ubnei Israel, you know what happened to the Jewish people? They multiplied, but what happened right afterwards? Vayishretzu. And he looks at the word Vayishretzu, and what do you see? Why is a rodent called a sheretz? Sheratz. Sheratz. It's on the run. It is true. Have you ever tried a centipede? Everyone, I'm sure, had some kind of experience of losing to the bug, right? Meaning that you were sure that you had it, and then you miss it. It's rats, sheratz. That's why it's called a sheretz, sheratz. Ubnei Israel, paru, they multiplied, but then what happened? Vayishretzu, and says this Sforno also, sheratzim lebe'er shachas. They're running, they ran. They felt this freedom. Oh, right, emancipation. Oh, I could finally make my way to universities. Okay, now I'm going to find real values that are going to do good for the world. Right? Now, finally, I'll take care of all the problems that exist because I could finally close my Talmud and close my Torah. Now, that doesn't mean that everything the world does is ridiculous and wrong. In other words, look at Yosef, and this is the lecture you could give to that young student, right? That young student who is studying Talmud, and he's 19, but doesn't really find meaning. And he has this desire to do good for the world, right? Clean the oceans. It's not a bad thing, by the way. There is plastic, there is junk in the oceans. No question. I don't believe that in 20 years the world's going to come to an end like this 16-year-old girl does. But at the same time, it's a nice thing to clean oceans. And if someone says, I have this deep desire to be involved in environmental studies, to go ahead and figure out how to reduce plastic, and all you got to do, of course, is charge 5 cents, and there's no plastic, as you know, since then, because of that. But they want to come up with some solution. So what would I tell to that person, right? So the traditional approach would be just forget it, just sit in the Beis Medrash, ignore it. But let's say it's not working. Let's say they have this deep desire. So you could say to them, you know what? you could do for the world, but link yourself to Jewish tradition as you are doing it. In other words, you have this appreciation for the magnificence and beauty of the world, study it, but every single morning daven. And when you daven, you say, Posech es yodecha, you talk about an Almighty that sustains all life, and an Almighty that wants us to have a beautiful world. And you could study, link yourself to tradition as you are involved with the world. In other words, follow the path of Yosef. Yosef was involved in taking care of Egypt. Yosef was concerned. Yosef understood that every single person is created in the image of God, and if I can make a contribution to society, I'll do it. But it was with an understanding that every person is valuable, not because he is the descendant of an ape, but rather because he has within him a spark of the divine, B'Tselem Elokim. In other words, link your things you do for the world with Jewish tradition, because everything finds its roots in Jewish tradition. And you could be a person that is concerned, that is doing, you're well-rooted, follow the path of Yosef. And therefore the verse, by the way, when it tells us about the death of Yosef and its brothers, we are basically being told there was an end of those type of people who had the ability to be involved in the world and yet be 100% committed to what Judaism and the values of their tradition were about. That came to an end because the next generation detached itself. The next generation felt that it is impossible to be involved and do good for the world and still be linked to Jewish tradition. There, you've heard the name Henry Morgenthau. So there actually were two of them, a junior and a senior. Okay, the well-known one was the junior, Secretary of the Treasury during the years of the Second World War. He did meet some rabbis who were trying to go ahead and convince Roosevelt to do more for the sake of the Jewish people. How much was done? There's a lot of literature about that, but there's actually a Henry Morgenthau Sr., his father. And his father, a Jew, of course, a little bit more connected than the son, at least you would expect it to be so, because he was a generation closer to his roots. The family originated in Germany, came to the Americas before all the Russian Jews came in 1880, and obviously a very accomplished individual. And he was, for a time during World War I, the United States representative ambassador to Turkey, to the Ottoman Empire. And Henry Morgenthau Sr. is a hero among the Armenians. He's a hero for the Armenians. Why? Why is he a hero for the Armenians? He is one of the few people that actually was involved or updating the United States and the New York Times to what the Turks and Ottoman Empire were doing to the Armenians, which was close enough to a genocide, right? I don't know if the numbers are precisely correct with the 1.5 million, that could be debatable, but it does make a difference. They did massacre hundreds of thousands of Armenians, right? The world didn't do anything, right? And the world really doesn't know about it. It seems to be they have to open their own Hollywood to do it. The Jews, right, we've been doing a very good job of at least doing our hishtadlus, our best. I don't think that's the answer to anti-Semitism by just producing movies about the Holocaust. But you got to admit that there is a lot there about books and literature, and the Armenians have not had the level of success. Different topic and different thing to discuss. But the one person who observed it and walked around and warned the pashas there were three people running the country of the Young Turks, that you guys, in other words, the only one to actually roll up his sleeves is Henry Morgenthau Sr. And he was the one that was sending the information back to Washington, and the pressure on the Turks came from him. Okay, so now, what's interesting to note is that after he sees what a human could do to another human, right, you would expect him to be sensitive to his own people as well. And what do I mean by that? In 1918, he was sent, this is when he finished his job there in Turkey, he was sent to Poland to assess the situation of the Jews, because in Poland itself there were massacres during World War I, not ones that we recall due to the fact that there was a Holocaust some 25 years later, but the reality is that this is news that reached the White House, the Wilson White House, that there is a situation and a challenge for Jewish people in Poland. And he came back with a report. And this is from a little bit of the history I read about it, that they say that the problem with Henry Morgenthau's attitude towards his surveying of the situation was that he was inclined to justify the Poles as much as possible. In other words, politically it would be better for the administration in Washington to be in good terms with the Poles. If he would come back with a report that was too critical of the fact that they're not doing enough to protect the Jews, it won't be good for the United States' relationship with the Polish government. So therefore he tried to water down what was taking place towards the Jews, and the Zionist leaders, for example, didn't even want to meet him because of it. So here you have someone that knows, that sensed, that saw, right, what humans could do to one another, what hatred could do towards an ethnic group. He saw it, he felt it. If he would have been linked a little bit more to his nation, right? If he would have been a person perhaps that would have been linked to his tradition, maybe the attitude would have been a little bit different, but he completely detached himself. And this is what is taking place right here. The Jews want to do for society, they detach themselves from their roots. So what happens? The king of Egypt, how does he look at the Jewish people? You turn to the king of Egypt and say, how can you be nasty towards the Jews? Don't you remember there was a Yosef? And how does he respond? Yosef had nothing to do with the Jews. In the words of the Sforno, it is impossible that it's impossible that someone like Yosef that was so concerned about society was a member of that ethnic group. When Jews detach themselves from their roots and do things feeling that their Judaism can make no contribution, cannot assist them at all in what they want to achieve, when they detach, what happens? Pharaoh detaches the Jew from Judaism as well. So there's a midah keneged midah here with what is taking place with Yosef. That's what we have. Okay, so now we talked a little bit about our nation, but we got to talk about Moshe Rabbeinu. We got to talk about Moshe Rabbeinu. So we're going to turn to page 296. You know the story, right? You know the fact that I always like mentioning that when in Memphis we drove by a church once and there was a big sign, right? Don't be depressed because even Moses was once a basket case. So here we have it. We know the story. We know that the daughter of Pharaoh saves him. At the end of page 296, he grew up in the house of Pharaoh, and he was brought up as a child, Vahila Leben. But we're going to focus a little bit on the name. Focus on the name. And we are told, Vatikra Shemo, and his name is Moshe. Why? Vatomer, bottom 296, Ki min hamayim meshisiu. Because I drew him from the water. Mashui, something that's drawn out in Hebrew, I think modern Hebrew as well. So therefore he was the one that was drawn out of the water. Fine? Names are important. Names are important in our tradition. But the question that is asked by many is, why was his name not Mashui? In other words, Moshe means that he draws others out. Mashui is he was drawn out. So why couldn't it be Mashui Rabbeinu? Maybe we're not accustomed to it, but say it enough times, we could have made Mashui our lead. Like, why is it not Mashui? This is a question that's asked. Why Moshe, not Mashui? Fine? So we're going to have to talk a little bit about what we know as the chain existence. Chain existence. And what do we mean by that? We talk often about the fact that in our tradition, and throughout the years, we've heard many lectures and talks about the concept of a world to come, about reward for the soul, which are all true things, right? You do good deeds, you get reward for your soul. And sometimes when you hear such messages over and over and over again, you might develop the attitude that our whole existence here is insignificant. All we need to do is just do good deeds, enhance the soul with bonus points, and then merit after 120 to cash in. But that's not a complete picture of Judaism, because we believe that there is value in this world. We believe there's value in this world, but that's fundamental, that God created a world, that He values it, right? We want to go ahead and fix the world. We want to make a better world. If all it would be about is just to get credit and move on to the real world, so why is there this focus on making the world a better place? Why do we need this messianic era? Let us live in a world where there's challenge, because then we'll get credit. So obviously, this is fundamental in Judaism. There's value in this world. We have to appreciate the world. We have to be careful, concerned about the world, concerned about the environment, about all creatures of the world, about all members of the human race. This is fundamental to Judaism, no question about that. Now, we value this world, but there's a problem. We're not here forever. We're not here forever. So I want to have an impact that's not just relevant for the X amount of years I'm here. I want to have an impact that will be here in 100 years from now as well. So how do I achieve that? So we work often on chain existence. What's chain existence? To inspire the next generation, right? To have an impact, do good things that impact the next generation, a relationship with younger people, right? We are concerned, focusing on education, right? Why there are so many fights about schools, because it's important, right? It is important. We are very concerned about the future of our nation. And there is also an understanding, that when you do good, you impact others and they do good, right? You realize that if I walk in a very bad mood toward the workplace and I cause others to be in a bad mood, right? And then they go home and they're in a bad mood, and they impact their family members who are in a bad mood, and then the child goes to school in a bad mood, and then the teacher's in a bad mood. You could really have some massive effect from that bad mood, right? And the opposite is true as well, right? We do know that people that come in with a positive attitude, that are happy, right? They create, there's a chain reaction. There's a chain reaction. And therefore you got to give a lot of credit to those who are able to put a stop. In other words, that they were impacted in a negative way, but if they in turn go ahead and create a positive, that's the greatest of all good deeds probably, right? That they change the reaction. Chain existence. We believe in thinking and having an impact on the future as well. Okay, so that's piece of information number one that is important. You know, there's a statement that appears in the Talmud that is extremely unclear, and it's a statement of Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan, reading the text where the Torah describes the animals making their way out of the ark in Parshas Noach, and the Torah tells us that the animals came out lemishpechotehem. That's what the text tells us, that the animals came out with their families or for their families. And comes Rabbi Yochanan in the Talmud and he says, lemishpechotehem velohem, meaning they came out lemishpechotehem, either with their families or for their families, velohem, but they didn't come out. What does that mean? So it's unclear. So when there is an unclear statement in the Talmud, it's an opportunity for many, many drushes, because everyone can come up with their own explanation. So I've mentioned here the fact that sometimes when people experience terrible events, right, and goes through a very challenging situation, they really don't, in some ways they can't continue living. They live, but it's not really living. But sometimes they do it for others. Right, to talk about the generation that went through the Shoah, the Holocaust survivors. I think everyone would agree that for many of them, deep down there was something that wasn't alive anymore. They were still functioning, right? They were still acting as if they're functioning, but they lived for the sake of children, for the next generation. They lived for others. So therefore, there was a churban. In other words, when you talk about Parshas Noach, you talk about the flood, there was a destruction. When you come out of a destruction, sometimes you don't live for yourself, you live lemishpechotehem, for the sake of the family, velohem, not for themselves, right? Sometimes we live that we think about the future because we are a link in a chain, and it's a chain existence. That's a reality. And when I do good, right, and I have the ability to inspire someone, it's with an understanding that they in turn should go out and inspire someone else. The Talmud tells us that David HaMelech was greater than Shaul in many areas, and among them was that David was always careful not just to develop his own spirituality, but to teach others. And in the words of the Talmud, Shaul lo gali masechta. In other words, when he would study, he would develop, he would meditate on his own, but he would not focus on sharing it with others. David HaMelech had an understanding that my existence is not just my existence, but it's the impact I can have on others. Thinking about the future, right? And sometimes you have to set aside time of your own personal development for the sake of the future, right? That's what we are being told. Chain existence. So now comes this Sforno, and he tells us the following. You should know. The daughter of Pharaoh is a very special young lady, right? She's quite incredible if you think about it, right? Grows up in the royal family. Her father is a brutal ruler. It would be easy for her to just remain in this comfortable environment of the palace, but she sees, and she obviously felt something wrong is taking place here, and after recognizing the fact that this young child is Jewish, and he was destined really to be killed, she felt, you know what? I save him. I drew him out of the water, right? I drew him out of the water. But if such an event occurred for him, you know what his goal is? What's his goal? Remember, chain existence. Not to just, okay, I'm saved and I live happy, but rather, if I was drawn out of water, what's my responsibility? To be a Moshe, to go ahead and draw others out. To draw others out. And that was Moshe. He drew, right? He extracted, in essence, a nation out of Egypt. And our whole existence, when we talk about Mitzrayim, the rabbis focus on the fact that the word Meitzar also means a boundary. And our whole life is with boundaries, right? There's a limit what we can achieve. It's always interesting when you hear these people that get up and talk about everyone could be successful. Well, what's the name? Roberts. What's not Robert? What's
Tony Robbins.
Robbins. I always mix up his name. I'm not a big chassid of his. But, charismatic fellow, the big jaw, can get up and talk about success, right? And he has a private island and a plane, and everyone can be it, and you go to one of these weekends and 8,000 people are all charged. And then, a week later, they go back to the regular life. And it's absurd. Because if you define success as money and being famous, it's not going to happen. Not everyone is going to have quote-unquote success, if that's how you define success. If, on the other hand, you define success as being grateful, right? An understanding that this world is not everything, an understanding that there are priorities, that being kind is important. If you have a proper understanding of what success is, then actually everyone could be successful. It's true. You could have people with the greatest challenge, and they are success stories. Think of Tommy Judkovich, right? Russ come to shul, Tommy, right? Tommy comes to shul, and he's major medical challenges. But he's a fighter, he still wants to daven, and he's not giving up. He can barely utter a word, but he's not going to back off his desire to daven, and he's not going to back off his desire to learn, right? He's a success story. He's a tremendous success story, right? And you could have someone that's jogging and running and has the money, and they're a complete failure because they're unhappy. They're for sure that their neighbor is not looking at them and respecting them enough, right? If you have an understanding of what life is about, you realize that our existence here has its boundaries. There are limitations. It's a fact. It's a fact. There are meitzarim, there are boundaries. What takes us out of our boundaries? What takes us out of those boundaries that we won't be limited? Our values. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe, the one who extracts, withdraws, didn't just take our ancestors out of Mitzrayim. He, for eternity, takes us out of our own boundaries. There are limitations, right? We are of those limitations, but when we have these ideals and a commitment to the higher being and understanding that we can reach those goals through our tradition, through Torah, that's Moshe. That's what it's all about, right? That's what really Moshe is about. So here, Moshe Rabbeinu is introduced, Ki min hamayim meshitiu, right? You know, when it comes to the Zmiros of Shabbos, Nachlat Yaakov Yirash, in other words, that by observing the Shabbat, you merit, right, the inheritance of Yaakov, and you say the words, keep your eyes open this Shabbat, Bli mitzarim nachala, without, you're going to have an inheritance without boundaries. Why specifically Shabbat? Well, Shabbat is that me'en olam haba. Shabbat is a time that we're not chasing, we're not running, right? We're not going ahead and figuring out how to invest properly or how to make more money or how to... We withdraw, and it's a day that reminds us of our identity, and it reminds us of the fact that it's a relationship with the higher being, like olam haba, b'li mitzarim, without the boundaries. Moshe is the one that takes us out of the land of boundaries. So these are the two pieces of information that we have to remember of the journey of our ancestors, right? Their attitude of believing that if we make our contribution to this society, they're going to love us. A lot of talk now about anti-Semitism, right? And I think for every single person in this room, we're not completely shocked. No one's completely shocked. I do believe that if your agenda is, if you come from a background that my goal is to be a good citizen of this country and to be accepted and I want to be considered an American or a Canadian, right? And that has been your chinuch and your goal for the past 7 decades since the Holocaust. So therefore, when there's a reappearance of anti-Semitism, it's shocking. What do you mean? I'm a Canadian, right? For south of the border even more. I'm an American. Like, how can they hate me, right? On the other hand, for someone that understands, we are extremely grateful to this great country, right? We are grateful for the fact that we can live in a society where we can practice our Judaism. We are grateful for the fact that we can put our menorah by our window. But reality is that we don't long-term belong here, and there are going to be reminders, unfortunately. And yes, we have to do our part to the best of our ability to put an end to it, but at the same time recognize that that's part and parcel of what the exile is about. We're not completely shocked, right? We pray, we do our ishtadlut, we put on security cameras, hopefully, right? We go ahead and figure out if there are grants from the government to assist us in that matter. We go ahead and try to reach out and bring children to Holocaust education. We try all that, but there's a more of an acceptance if we understand who we are. When you know who you are, you could deal with life far better than when you fool yourself, because when you fool yourself, sometimes the bluff, poof, vanishes. And that's the challenge. And that's what this parsha teaches us about, that we are given the individual that teaches us and gives us the tools, and hopefully we could learn from it. And I thank everyone for coming, and we see you Bezrat Hashem next week. Thank you again to our sponsors. Neshama should have an aliyah.